Two other issues I want to get to that we haven't talked about. One, Hong Kong. Precisely because this is what's driven some of the harshest blowback from the United Kingdom with the functional ending of the one state, two systems rule, now that we have this new national security law.
This is the end of Hong Kong. This is the end of one country, two systems.
But we see the Germans, the largest economy in Europe, saying, we're not going to let Hong Kong affect our trading relationship with China. It's too important. But has China become functionally too big to really push back on some of these critical political issues?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not if the West acts in unison. Absolutely not. I mean, I think that what you're absolutely right, that Hong Kong has brought home very powerfully, I think, in the UK political circles, that what China is up to, and that it has essentially, ripped up the agreement that was there, that it is absolutely focused on what it sees as, its own national security and preventing Hong Kong becoming any kind of, hotbed of festering opposition to the regime. It is, a very, very clear indication of where China is now going and what sort of China it is. That said, I don't think it's at all too late, or indeed at all impossible, for the West actually to have a really big impact on the way China behaves, particularly if the West acts in concert. But what I think is much harder is, the US is big enough that the US can make a difference with, individual actions, whether it's against individual companies or sanctions and so forth. And one thing that the Trump administration has achieved is a real sense that in China that, this hurts when the US acts. So I'm not, I think that there's been a really important role played by the US in the last few years. But what I think we haven't had is the development of a sort of strategic perspective. And I think that's what we need. And that strategic perspective would ideally include the West acting in concert, just as the West did when we created the existing global trade rules.
The Chinese economy rebounded from coronavirus faster than any other major economy, but also many in the West, with a lot of reason, have pointed the finger at the Chinese for having obscured, covered up the original outbreak. To what extent does there need to be a reckoning for the way that coronavirus initially emerged and was obscured by the Chinese government?
So I don't really know what a reckoning would add up to. What I do think, I think this is a very powerful example of just how bad the relationship has got, just how kind of short-termist both sides are behaving and thinking, rather than China welcoming in outside observers and analysts to understand, what had happened, how it had spread, where it's come from, and rather than the US, as it did with Ebola, sort of taking the lead, given the preeminence of its epidemiological talent and epidemiological institutions. We didn't have either of that. We had, as you say, China kind of refusing to acknowledge that it's had any role in this at all, and in fact, rather aggressively propagating an opposite view through its diplomacy and so forth. And we've had, President Trump talking about, Kung flu and all of those kind of things. So, both sides, I think, are to blame for the fact that this has been, a pandemic from a multilateral perspective has been appallingly handled. There's an enormous amount that we need to work together on. It's not just getting a vaccine, it's making sure that the vaccine is globally available. There's a huge amount of stuff still to do. And, one would hope that you would have, the world's two biggest economies working hand in glove. So, yeah, China absolutely bears a lot of blame for that, but it's not just China.